Life was good at least. I thought so. Emily and I had been together for almost 10 years, and we had built what seemed like a perfect family. We had two wonderful children, and Emily was pregnant with our third. On the surface, everything appeared just fine. She stayed at home, managing the house and kids, while I worked hard to support our growing family. In the evenings, we would sit together, laugh, and talk about our future. Everything felt right. But, as they say, perfection is often an illusion. It all started to feel off not too long ago. I first noticed Emily's growing attachment to social media. I get it, she didn't have many friends in the area, and being a full-time mom can be lonely. But it seemed like she was spending more and more time scrolling through her phone, liking posts, chatting in private groups, and giggling at her screen. At first, I dismissed it. She needed an outlet, some entertainment. It wasn't until I started seeing her behavior change that my unease began. Her frequent trips to the city became a new routine. "I need to pick up a few things," she would say casually, or, "I'm meeting some friends for lunch." It didn't feel like a big deal at first, but those lunches started to stretch into afternoons. She'd come home late, tired and full of excuses. I told myself it was just her way of getting some space. Everybody needs it from time to time. But then came the other small signs, the ones that you can't explain away so easily. One afternoon, I came home earlier than usual, hoping to surprise her. As I walked into the living room, there she was, completely absorbed in her phone. When she noticed me, she jumped like a child caught sneaking candy. She fumbled to lock her screen, her face flushed. I asked her casually, "Who was that?" She smiled, but it felt forced, and she answered with a nervous laugh. "Just an old friend from school. Nothing important." Something about the way she rushed to change the subject didn't sit right with me. She had never been secretive before. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention. She was glued to her phone more often than not, and always seemed to position herself so I couldn't see the screen. It wasn't like her at all. A few nights later, I walked by while she was in the kitchen, her back to me. Her phone buzzed on the counter. I couldn't help but glance at the screen. The message preview caught my eye. "Can't wait to see you again, Emily." Friday night. I quickly stepped away, pretending not to have seen anything, but my mind raced. Who was that? What did he mean by again? Was this the old friend from school she mentioned? I kept quiet, not wanting to jump to conclusions without more information, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Over the following week, her trips to the city became more frequent. Each time, her explanations felt more rehearsed, like she had practiced them beforehand. "I'm helping with a charity event. I'm meeting some friends from the moms group," but it was always the same. She would leave, dressed up more than usual, come back late, and act distant. The warmth between us was fading. I could feel it, even if I didn't want to admit it. Then came the night that truly set off the alarm bells. She posted a photo on social media, a cozy shot of her curled up on a couch, a glass of wine in hand, the caption reading, "Much needed relaxation," but the background wasn't familiar. It wasn't our home. I stared at the picture, feeling my chest tighten. The style of the furniture, the decorations, it didn't match anything in our house. I knew I had never seen that room before. Where was this taken? I asked her casually later that evening. "Oh, just at a friend's place," she replied nonchalantly. "We had a little get-together, nothing special," but the lie was there, clear as day in her eyes. I knew she wasn't telling me the truth. I didn't press her, though. Instead, I started piecing things together in my mind. Each new clue pointed in the same direction. She was hiding something. Days turned into weeks, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Emily was drifting further away. Her once joyful laughter had been replaced by distracted smiles, her affection toward me had dulled, and she became even more protective of her phone. Every message she received came with a quick swipe to hide the screen, and any time I asked about her day, her responses felt mechanical. The walls between us were growing higher, and I had no idea how to break through. One night, as she prepared for yet another trip to the city, I felt a wave of helplessness wash over me. I couldn't go on pretending like nothing was happening. My mind replayed all the strange moments, the hidden texts, the unfamiliar photo. My suspicions had evolved into a cold certainty something was terribly wrong. As she kissed me goodbye, I looked into her eyes, searching for a glimpse of the woman I once knew. But all I saw was a stranger. As she walked out the door, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to sit idly by any longer. I was going to find out the truth, whatever it took. That night, I began planning my next move. It was time to dig deeper. I just had no idea how dark things would get from here. The night after Emily left for her city trip, I stayed awake, my mind running in circles. The weight of suspicion had become unbearable, and I knew I couldn't just let things slide. I needed to do something, anything to understand what was really going on. So, I decided to start where most secrets are hidden these days, her phone. Emily had always been careful, but when she came back late that night, she made a mistake. Her phone, usually clutched in her hand or tucked in her purse, was left on the kitchen counter while she went upstairs to shower. I couldn't believe my luck. This was my chance. I hesitated for a moment, feeling a pang of guilt. We were married, and I had always trusted her. But now, that trust had been shattered, and I had no choice but to find out the truth for myself. My hands were shaking as I picked up her phone. The screen lit up with a text notification. Looking forward to Friday. Can't wait to see you. I froze. The message was from Michael. That name again, the so-called friend from school. My mind went blank as I read the words over and over. There was no mistaking the tone. This wasn't a casual message. It was secretive, full of anticipation. My chest tightened, and I felt a rush of anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed to gather more evidence before confronting her. I quickly opened her messages with Michael. Their conversation went back weeks, maybe even months, filled with flirtatious texts, jokes, and plans to meet up. It was clear that their relationship was more than just friendly. My heart pounded in my ears as I scrolled through message after message. Every word felt like a betrayal. Suddenly, I came across a message that made my blood run cold. Last night was amazing. I've missed you. It was from Emily, and it was sent just a few days ago on one of the nights she claimed to be at a charity event. My hand clenched the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. There it was, undeniable proof. She had been lying to me all along. My first instinct was to storm upstairs and confront her immediately, but I held back. If I rushed this, she might find a way to deny everything, to twist the situation. I needed more than just text messages. I needed something concrete, something that she couldn't argue against. The next day, while Emily was out running errands, I decided to dig deeper. I remembered the strange photo she had posted on social media a few weeks earlier, the one from that unfamiliar living room. I went back through her social media feed, staring at the image. The room looked so different from ours, and something about it felt off. It was too perfect, too clean, like it wasn't even lived in. A quick reverse image search online brought up nothing, but as I zoomed in on the photo, something caught my eye. There was a small reflection in the glass of a nearby picture frame, a silhouette. A man's silhouette. It wasn't clear, but it was enough. It couldn't have been just a girl's night as she had claimed. That was the final push I needed. I had to see it with my own eyes. The next weekend, when Emily told me she was heading out for another city trip, I decided to follow her. I waited until she left, then trailed behind her at a safe distance. My heart raced with every turn, my palms slick with sweat as I gripped the steering wheel. I tried to tell myself that I was overreacting, that there could still be a logical explanation. But deep down, I knew the truth. After an hour, we reached the outskirts of the city. I watched as she pulled into a quiet, upscale neighborhood and parked in front of a modern apartment complex. I stayed back, watching from my car as she stepped out, looking around as if to make sure she wasn't being followed. Then she walked briskly to the door, where a man was waiting for her. It was Michael. He hugged her, then opened the door, ushering her inside. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was like watching my life fall apart in real time. This was no casual meeting. This was an affair. I sat there in stunned silence, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I wanted to scream, to burst out of the car and confront them both. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed more than just my word against hers. I needed to catch her in the act, to expose the lies she had been feeding me for months. I waited for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a short while. When they finally left the apartment together, I snapped a few photos from a distance. They were holding hands, completely unaware that I was there, watching. It felt surreal. This was the woman I had loved, the mother of my children. How could she do this to me? As they walked toward Michael's car, I saw him open the passenger door for her, and just before she got in, they hugged. A long, lingering hug that made my blood boil. That was it. I had all the proof I needed. The drive home was a blur. My mind was racing, full of rage, pain, and confusion. I thought about our kids, about the family we had built, and how everything was now crumbling beneath me. How long had this been going on? Did she even feel guilty? And worst of all, was the child she was carrying even mine? When I got home, I sat in silence, staring at the evidence I had gathered. The photos, the texts, the lies. It was all there, staring me in the face. I felt sick, but I knew I couldn't keep this to myself for much longer. Emily had no idea what was coming, but soon enough, she would. I just needed to decide how to confront her, and when. This was no longer a matter of suspicion. I had proof now, and there was no turning back. The truth was out, and it was uglier than I could have ever imagined. I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the photos on my phone. I had known for weeks that something was off, but seeing them together like that laughing hug, as if they were the ones building a life together, it was the confirmation I dreaded. My hands were trembling, and the rage inside me was growing. Emily came home later that night, just like she had on so many of her city trips. She walked into the house with the same casual demeanor, smiling at me like nothing was wrong. My stomach churned at the sight of her, but I stayed calm. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I needed more than just a few pictures. I needed to know everything. I needed the full truth. Over the next few days, I became consumed with finding out the depth of her betrayal. I knew she wasn't going to confess unless I forced her hand, so I took matters into my own. It started with checking her phone more thoroughly. Late at night, when she was asleep, I unlocked her phone and dug through her messages. Most of the conversation with Michael was deleted, but she had missed a few messages that slipped through the cracks. One message stuck out more than the rest. From just a few weeks ago, Michael had texted her, "It's been amazing seeing you again after all these years. I can't stop thinking about us back in school, and now." The words hit me hard. This wasn't just some fleeting affair, this was deeper. She had reconnected with her first love, the one she had gushed about when we first met, telling me stories of how he was her first everything back in high school. I thought that was all ancient history, buried in the past. But now, it was clear that those feelings had resurfaced, and she had let them take over. I kept scrolling, finding more fragments of their conversations. They talked about sneaking away during her errands, about how excited they were to be together again. My heart sank when I saw how often they mentioned meeting at Michael's apartment, the same apartment where I had watched them kiss. This wasn't just a one-time mistake. It had been going on for months, maybe longer. My mind raced. How could she do this to us? To our family? To the kids? And worse, was there more? Was the baby she was carrying even mine? I couldn't shake it. I needed to know for sure. There was only one way to find out. I decided to do a DNA test for the baby. It felt extreme, but after everything I had uncovered, I didn't trust her anymore. I couldn't take her word for anything. I ordered the kit online and kept it hidden, waiting for the right moment to swab a sample without her knowing. If the baby wasn't mine, it would be the final blow, the undeniable proof that she had betrayed me in the worst possible way. In the meantime, I followed her movements more closely. I knew her patterns now: the trips to the city, the extra time she spent on her phone, the lies she told me so effortlessly. I even placed a small tracking app on her phone. It wasn't something I ever thought I'd do, but I needed to know exactly where she was going and who she was meeting. I had reached a point where nothing else mattered except finding out the full truth. Days passed, and every night felt heavier than the last. I had trouble sleeping, constantly thinking about her with him. The betrayal gnawed at me every minute of the day. She was still acting as if everything was normal, going about her daily routine, playing the role of the devoted wife and mother. But to me, it was all a lie. Every smile, every kiss she gave me felt tainted. I knew the truth now, and there was no going back. Then came the day that changed everything. I had been monitoring her phone and saw that she had another meeting planned with Michael. The message was brief, just a confirmation of their time together later that evening. I could feel the anger rising in me, but I didn't act on it. Instead, I drove into the city once again, waiting near Michael's apartment complex. I knew she'd be there, and I was ready this time. She arrived like clockwork, parking in the same spot and walking up to his door with that same lightness in her step. I stayed in the shadows, watching as she went inside. My mind went numb. It was as if I was watching a movie of someone else's life, not my own. The wife I thought I knew was in there with another man, and there was nothing left for me to guess about. I had seen it all, but I wasn't finished. I waited outside for hours, watching them leave the apartment once again. This time, I was ready with my camera, catching every moment of their departure together. More laughs. I snapped photos, feeling both vindicated and utterly shattered. I had the proof I needed. There was no denying it now. That night, I sat down in the dark, staring at the pictures. My phone buzzed. The DNA test results had come in. My hands trembled as I opened the email, praying for something, anything, to hold on to. But as soon as I saw the results, my world collapsed. The baby wasn't mine. The woman I had spent nearly a decade with, the mother of my children, had been living a lie, and the child she was carrying belonged to another man, her first love. The pain was unbearable, but the anger was stronger. I knew what I had to do next. It was time to confront her, and I wasn't going to hold back. As I prepared for what was coming, I realized that this wasn't just about exposing her betrayal. This was about regaining control, about taking back my life from the lies she had spun around me. I had uncovered the truth, and now it was time for her to face it. The moment I saw the DNA results, everything inside me crumbled. I stared at the screen in disbelief, my heart racing as the reality sank in. The baby wasn't mine. Emily had lied to me, deceived me for months, and the child she was carrying belonged to Michael, not me. I felt hollow, as if everything that had mattered in my life had been ripped away in an instant. I spent the rest of that night pacing the house, my mind going over every moment, every memory we had shared. How long had she been lying to me? How could she look me in the eye, kiss me goodnight, and act like everything was fine? The betrayal was deeper than I had ever imagined, and now there was no going back. The trust we once had was shattered. Morning came, but the weight of what I had discovered didn't lift. If anything, it grew heavier. I had proof now, undeniable evidence that Emily had been unfaithful not just emotionally, but physically, and had brought another man's child into our family. I couldn't let this go. It was time to confront her, and I wasn't going to sugarcoat anything. She had to know that I was done playing the fool. Emily came home later that day, acting as if nothing was wrong. She smiled at me. How could she be so calm, so collected, knowing what she had done? I couldn't stand the sight of her pretending like nothing had changed. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice more steady than I felt. She turned to me, her smile faltering slightly as she saw the seriousness on my face. "Sure, what's going on?" she asked, clearly unaware of the storm that was about to hit. I motioned for her to sit down at the kitchen table, and she did, looking confused. I sat across from her, trying to keep my emotions in check, but it was hard. Every word felt like it had the potential to break me, but I couldn't hold back anymore. "I know everything," I started, my voice cold. "About you and Michael." Her eyes widened in shock, and for a brief moment, I saw panic flash across her face. She tried to cover it up, but it was too late. She knew she had been caught. She opened her mouth to say something, but I held up my hand to stop her. "Don't," I said sharply. "I don't want to hear any excuses. I've seen the messages, the photos. I've watched you two together." Her face went pale as she realized I wasn't bluffing. "I followed you to his apartment," I continued, my voice rising with anger. "I watched you walk inside, saw you kiss him. I have the pictures to prove it. So don't even try to lie to me." She looked down at the table, her hands trembling as she absorbed what I was saying. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between us, the air thick with tension. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry," she said, her eyes welling up with tears. "It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think." I snapped, cutting her off. "You've been lying to me for months. You've been sneaking around with him, acting like everything was fine at home while you were out there with him. Her tears started to fall, but I couldn't feel sympathy anymore. All I could feel was anger and betrayal. She reached across the table, as if to touch my hand, but I pulled away. "And the baby," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "The baby isn't mine, is it?" Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't answer right away, but the look on her face told me everything I needed to know. I already knew the truth, but hearing it from her was like pouring salt on an open wound. She shook her head slowly, tears streaming down her face. "No," she whispered. "It's Michael's." I stared at her, feeling a mixture of rage and heartbreak that I could barely contain. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make her feel the pain that was ripping through me. But all I could do was sit there, frozen by the weight of it all. "How could you do this?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "How could you let this happen? We have a family, Emily. We have 2 kids. And you—" I stopped, unable to find the words. Everything felt so surreal, like I was trapped in someone else's nightmare. She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she cried. I don't know how it got this far. I was lonely and he—" "Don't you dare blame this on being lonely," I interrupted, my anger flaring again. "You made a choice, Emily. You chose to go behind my back, to meet with him, to lie to me over and over again. This wasn't a mistake. This was you throwing everything away." For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of her crying. I sat there, numb, not knowing what to do next. Part of me wanted to walk out the door and never look back, but another part of me wanted to make her feel what I was feeling. "I trusted you," I whispered. "I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me?" She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen, but I didn't feel any sympathy. I was past that now. I stood up from the table, the decision already made in my mind. "We're done," I said coldly. "I can't do this anymore. You've destroyed everything." Emily's sobs grew louder, but I didn't care. I walked upstairs to pack a bag, ignoring her cries from the kitchen. She had made her choice, and now I was making mine. The marriage was over. I couldn't see a future for us anymore. The woman I once loved was a stranger to me now, and the life we had built was nothing but a lie. As I zipped up my bag, I felt a strange sense of relief. The breaking point had come, and there was no going back. As I zipped up my bag, the weight of what was happening settled on me. This was the end of everything I had known for the last 10 years: our marriage, our family, our future. Yet, despite the crushing betrayal, I felt an eerie sense of calm. The storm inside me had raged for long enough. Now, it was time to face the wreckage Emily had caused. I went downstairs, where she was still sitting at the kitchen table, crying into her hands. The woman I had loved, the mother of my children, now looked like a stranger. I paused at the doorway, staring at her, part of me still struggling to believe that the woman I had trusted so completely had done this to us. But there was no room for doubt anymore. The truth was out in the open, and nothing would ever be the same. "Emily," I said, my voice firm. She lifted her head, her tear-streaked face pleading with me. But I was beyond her tears now. "Please, just listen to me," she begged, standing up. "We can work through this. I made a mistake, I know that, but I love you. We can fix this." I shook my head, unable to stop the anger rising again. "A mistake? You call months of lying and sneaking around a mistake? You had an affair, Emily. You got pregnant with another man's child. This isn't something we can just fix. You destroyed our marriage." She stepped toward me, her hands reaching out. "No, it wasn't like that." I was confused. I didn't know how to stop it. She choked on her words, as if struggling to find a way to make sense of her betrayal. "Michael was— I don't know. It was never supposed to go this far. But we have 2 children, and they need us. We can find a way to make this right. Please." I laughed bitterly. "Right? How can you even say that? The baby you're carrying is his, Emily, not mine. You've been living a double life, pretending everything was fine while you were meeting him in secret. Do you even understand what you've done?" She collapsed into a chair, her sobs intensifying. I know I've hurt you, but I love you. I swear I do. It was a mistake, and I regret it more than you know. A part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to hold on to the hope that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. But I couldn't. Not after everything I had discovered. The texts, the photos, the DNA test. They were all undeniable proof of how far she had fallen. There was no coming back from this. Emily, I said, my voice low but steady. I'm leaving. Her head shot up. What? No, you can't just leave. We have kids. You can't walk out on us. I stepped closer, my voice firm. I'm not walking out on the kids. I'll be there for them, always. But you and me? We're done. You made your choice when you decided to betray me, and I'm making mine now. Her eyes widened with panic as she stood up, rushing toward me. No, please. Don't do this. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. You can't just throw it all away. I stared at her, shaking my head. You threw it away, Emily. The moment you let him into our lives, into our marriage, you threw everything away. This isn't just about what you did to me. It's about what you did to our family, to our children. You betrayed us all. She stood there, trembling, her hands clasped together as if trying to hold on to whatever was left between us. Please, she whispered. Please, don't leave me. For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to give in, to hold her and pretend that we could go back to the way things were. But that was just a fantasy. The truth had ripped us apart, and there was no way to rebuild what had been broken. I'm leaving, I repeated, my voice hardening. I'll pack the rest of my things tomorrow. We'll figure out the kids. But as far as we go, it's over. Her knees buckled as she collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I couldn't watch anymore. I turned my back on her and walked out of the room, the sound of her cries echoing in my ears. Upstairs, I grabbed the few things I had packed and walked toward the front door. Just as I reached for the handle, her voice stopped me. Is there someone else? I froze. The irony of her question hit me like a ton of bricks. How could she even ask that after what she had done? I turned slowly to face her, seeing the desperate look in her eyes. I thought about Sarah, the beautiful neighbor who had always been friendly, who had seen me struggling over the past few weeks, who had offered a kind ear. She had been there when Emily wasn't, when I felt my world crumbling. And yes, I had thought about it. I had thought about revenge, about doing to Emily what she had done to me. But that wasn't who I was. Or at least, it wasn't who I thought I was. Is that what you're worried about now? I asked, my voice cold. That I might do to you what you've already done to me? She said nothing, just stood there, waiting for an answer. I didn't give her one. Instead, I opened the door and walked out, letting the cold night air hit me as I stepped outside. As I stood there, staring out at the quiet street, my mind raced. I had confronted her. I had told her the truth, but why did I still feel like the broken one? I thought I'd feel better once I had exposed her betrayal, but all I felt was emptiness. I took a deep breath, looking across the street at Sarah's house. Maybe I did need revenge. Maybe I needed to feel like I had taken control again. I wasn't sure yet, but one thing was certain: this chapter of my life was over, and I was ready to turn the page. After walking out of the house that night, I felt numb. I had thought that confronting Emily would give me some sort of closure, but instead, it left a hollow emptiness inside me. The betrayal, the lies, the child that wasn't mine, it was all too much to process. All I could think about was how unfair it all was. I had given her everything, and in return, she destroyed our family. For days, I wandered through my life in a fog. At work, I went through the motions, pretending to be the same person, but inside, I was crumbling. Every night, I returned to that empty feeling, wondering how I could ever recover from what she had done. I was broken, and part of me hated myself for letting her break me so completely. That's when I began to think about Sarah. Sarah was our young neighbor, living across the street. She was in her mid-20s, vibrant, and full of life. We'd exchanged pleasantries over the years, but recently, she had been more than just the neighbor next door. She had noticed the strain on my face, seen the way I had been walking around like a shell of myself, and had offered a listening ear. It started out innocent enough, casual chats by the mailbox or small talk while I worked on the yard, but as my marriage with Emily crumbled, my conversations with Sarah became more frequent. She was stunning, with long brown hair, sharp green eyes, and a confidence that drew attention. The kind of woman any man would notice. I had always kept a respectful distance, but now, after everything that had happened with Emily, I found myself looking at her in a different light. She had always been there, kind and understanding, offering a smile when I felt like the world was collapsing around me. And the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about her. One evening, I was sitting alone in the house. Emily had taken the kids to visit her parents for the weekend, and the silence in the house was unbearable. I found myself looking out the window, staring at Sarah's house. The lights were on, and I could see her through the window, sitting on the couch, reading. Without thinking, I grabbed my jacket and walked across the street. I knocked on her door, feeling a strange mixture of nervousness and anger. This wasn't just about talking. This wasn't about catching up with a neighbor. This was something more. This was about regaining control over my life, about getting revenge on Emily for what she had done to me. Sarah opened the door with a smile, surprised to see me. "Hey, Mark," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I wasn't expecting company. I just needed to get out of the house," I replied, stepping inside. The warmth of her home felt welcoming, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anger. We sat on the couch, talking about everything and nothing. She asked about the kids, and I told her they were with Emily's parents for the weekend. Then, she asked how I was doing. It was a simple question, but it struck a nerve. "How am I doing?" I echoed, feeling the weight of everything I had been carrying. "I'm angry, hurt, lost. I don't even know who I am anymore. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, it's all gone." Sarah reached out, placing her hand on mine. Her touch was soft, comforting. "I'm so sorry, Mark," she said, her voice gentle. "You don't deserve this." Something inside me shifted. The anger that had been festering for weeks was now burning hot, and before I knew it, I leaned in, kissing her. For a split second, I expected her to pull away, to tell me this was wrong. But she didn't. She kissed me back. The kiss was like a release, all the pain, betrayal, and anger flooding out of me. I knew this was wrong, that I was using Sarah to fill the emptiness inside me, but I didn't care. In that moment, I wanted to feel something other than the ache that Emily had left behind. I wanted to hurt Emily the way she had hurt me, and I wanted to prove to myself that I could still take control of my life, that I wasn't just a victim of her betrayal. As the night went on, Sarah and I grew closer. It felt like revenge, like I was finally taking something back after everything that had been taken from me. We spent the night together, and for those few hours, I let go of the pain. I told myself it wasn't about emotions or love, it was about power, about regaining some semblance of control. The next morning, I woke up in Sarah's bed, staring at the ceiling. The rush of satisfaction from the night before had dulled, replaced by a strange mix of guilt and emptiness. This wasn't the kind of man I wanted to be. I had always prided myself on being loyal, on being the kind of man who put his family first. But now, after everything, I had become someone I barely recognized. I slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake Sarah, and headed back across the street to my own house. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale light over the neighborhood. As I unlocked the front door, I was struck by the realization that I had done exactly what I had sworn I never would. I had cheated, but instead of feeling triumphant, instead of feeling like I had won some twisted game of revenge, I felt empty. I had betrayed Emily, just as she had betrayed me, and now we were both broken in ways I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the final nail in the coffin of everything we had built together. Emily's betrayal had destroyed me, but my revenge had destroyed whatever was left of us. The satisfaction I had sought wasn't there. Instead, all I could feel was the weight of my own actions settling on my shoulders, heavy and cold. The revenge I thought would heal me had only deepened the wound. And now, there was no turning back. I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the empty chair across from me. The house was eerily quiet. The rush I had felt from my night with Sarah had faded into nothing, leaving me with a hollow, aching feeling. I thought that getting revenge on Emily would somehow make me feel better, like I had leveled the playing field. But it didn't. It only made everything worse. I had become the very thing I hated. Emily's betrayal had torn our family apart, but my revenge my night with Sarah wasn't the solution I thought it would be. If anything, it had deepened the chasm between us, pulling me even further away from the man I used to be. The house felt empty, stripped of the warmth and love it once had. Now, it was just a shell of the life we had built together. I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt that gnawed at me. I had crossed a line, one that I couldn't uncross. As I sat there in the early morning light, I realized that nothing I had done had changed the reality of what had happened. Emily had betrayed me with Michael. She had broken our vows, destroyed our family, and left me questioning everything I thought I knew about our life together. But in seeking revenge, I had lost a piece of myself, too. The door creaked open, and Emily stepped inside. She had come back early from her parents' house, the kids trailing behind her, unaware of the emotional war that was brewing between us. For a moment, I looked at her, and all the anger I had felt, the rage that had driven me to Sarah's bed, came rushing back. But this time, it was mixed with something else, shame. Shame for what I had done, for how far I had fallen in the name of revenge. Emily looked at me, her face still swollen from crying the last time we spoke. She knew something had shifted. The air between us was thick with tension, the weight of unspoken words heavy in the room. She sent the kids upstairs, and we were alone again, standing on the battlefield of our broken marriage. "We need to talk," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. She nodded silently, her eyes full of uncertainty. We both knew this conversation was inevitable, that we couldn't keep avoiding the truth any longer. She sat down across from me, her hands trembling as she folded them in her lap. I took a deep breath, trying to figure out where to start. There was so much I wanted to say, so much I needed to say, but the words wouldn't come. "I know I've hurt you," she whispered, breaking the silence. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Mark. I don't even know if I can forgive myself. But I never wanted it to get this far. I never wanted to destroy us." Her voice cracked, and I could see the guilt etched on her face. For a split second, I almost felt sorry for her. But then the memory of Michael, of their secret meetings, flashed in my mind, and the anger flared up again. "You didn't just hurt me, Emily," I said, my voice hardening. "You destroyed everything. Our marriage, our family, everything we built together. And for what? For him?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "It wasn't about him," she cried. "I know it seems that way, but it wasn't. I was lost. I didn't know who I was anymore. And when he came back into my life, I made a horrible mistake. But it didn't mean anything compared to what we have." I scoffed, unable to contain my bitterness. "Didn't mean anything? You were going to have his child, Emily. You were carrying his baby while lying to my face, pretending like nothing was wrong. How do you expect me to believe that?" Her face crumpled as the truth hit her again, and she buried her face in her hands, sobbing. But I couldn't let her tears sway me. I had spent too many nights being consumed by my own pain, and I wasn't about to let her guilt wash it all away. "We're done, Emily," I said coldly. "There's no coming back from this." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with desperation. "Mark, please. We can fix this. We can try counseling, or something. Don't throw away everything we've been through. We can still be a family." I shook my head, feeling the finality of it all settle in my chest. "It's too late for that. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." Her face fell, and I could see the realization sinking in. This wasn't a fight that we would come back from. This was the end. She stood up slowly, wiping her tears, and took a deep breath. "What about the kids?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling. "What do we tell them?" The thought of our children made my heart ache. They didn't deserve this. They didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of their parents' mistakes. But there was no way around it now. The truth would come out eventually. "We'll tell them the truth," I said, though the words felt heavy in my mouth. "That we couldn't make it work. That we both made mistakes." Emily nodded, her face pale as she turned toward the stairs, leaving me alone again in the quiet, empty house. As I sat there, the reality of everything hit me all at once. The marriage was over. The family we had built was gone. And even though Emily's betrayal had pushed us to this point, I couldn't ignore the fact that my actions had played a role, too. Seeking revenge had only deepened the divide between us, leaving nothing but ruins in its wake. The next few days passed in a blur. Emily and I spoke little, communicating only about the kids. We both knew the end was near, but neither of us wanted to say the final words. It felt too real, too final, but it was coming, and there was no stopping it. One evening, as I sat on the porch, staring at the darkening sky, Sarah's house caught my eye. The memory of that night flickered in my mind, but it didn't bring the satisfaction I had hoped for. It only reminded me of how lost I had become, how far I had strayed from the person I once was. Revenge had given me nothing but regret. And now, all I was left with was the fallout.